So yesterday I got cut off in my video, so I put part one, growing up in Southern California, gang culture. I wanted to finish it. I was mentioning when I left off that we even had, some females in our clique, and they were down in terms of they kind of operated as secretaries. Like they're the ones who organize the barbecues. They're the ones who like organize going to Skate Junction on Saturday nights, the roller rink. And that was always an exciting time because you would always come across like people from different sets, different hoods there at Skate Junction in West Covina. And so they would organize the house parties. So they were like, I know especially it was two of them, they were kind of like the secretaries of the gang. We didn't call them that, but that's how they basically operated. And so, you know, those 4 years, 4 or 5 years, whatever, that I kind of was hanging around that culture like pretty much since 1985, but we didn't click up to a clique until like probably I would say 87. And the thing is that growing up in Southern California gang culture, like I mentioned in the first video, it was real. I mean, it was an intense time of gang banging, and way more intense than it is now. And I think the most intense time of gang banging in Southern California was from the mid-70s through the mid-90s. I think things, the second half of the 90s started kind of declining in terms of the gang banging. A lot of it was, like I said, the big thing, and I'm going to talk about it, what caused the decline. I'll tell you the events. But it was really intense. And wearing the colors was real. You know, I dressed pretty much like a gangster. I mean, I had the overalls. Remember the overalls, Nike Cortez, house shoes, the Cascade jackets, Pendletons, white T-shirts, Dickies, cutting them off at the knees, wearing the knee-high socks, which was like a California thing. So did all that. And I remember, again, that we were about at our peak 40 deep. Okay? That's a small clique. And we had a lot of enemies around us. Got into several things. But as I mentioned, as far as like where you would say a guy that legitimately put in work the way you think of putting in work, it was especially one guy. And so I'm living my life, man. This is the life I'm living, right? And what saved me was in 1992, right before the LA riots, like 2 weeks, I had met what was my ex-wife at the time through what we call the party line. And for anybody in LA knows, the party line was, and I think they had it in probably all the big cities, but we'd go on, in California, we'd get on the party line and gangbang, claim our sets, try to meet girls. I met this one girl, woman, from New York, but she lived in Miami Beach, Florida. So I think I just turned 18. And we met, sight unseen. I went over there on a Greyhound bus to meet her. And I met her and I never came back. We ended up getting married and everything. And I came back, obviously, but I didn't come back for a while. I went to Miami Beach, and I'm all gangstered out, like LA gangster, this and that, dressing the part. And in Miami, I know they have their own stuff going on there, but they didn't really have like a deep embedded gang culture the way we do in California. So it's a whole different thing for me. I'm dressed the way I'm dressed, and nobody out there's dressing like that. Corduroy, and like I said, the house shoes, the Nike Cortez, the white T-shirts. The khakis, knee-high socks. So I go out there, I meet her, and actually, amazingly, my life got crazier going out there because she was kind of crazy. Like, she was had a gangster mentality herself. She was from New York. So I left right before the LA riots, and I remember the LA riots when they happened, watching them from Miami Beach, Florida on TV. I remember it was just 24-hour coverage of the LA riots, cable, the regular TV stations out there. I remember they had like 3 stations, which was weird because in LA we have more. And I'm like, dang. And I remember the peace treaty in Watts, and they try to start the peace treaty in other cities. But the one thing that, for people that are not from California or LA specifically, realize is that the LA riots had a big impact on the decline of the Crips and the Bloods. Because I know there's Crips and Bloods today, but the Crip and Blood war has nothing compared to the way it used to be before the LA riots. It was intense. The color thing, innocent people getting killed over wearing the wrong color. You had to remember where you were going and what you were wearing color-wise, depending on where you went, and even going outside. Especially if you were a Blood, you had to watch, because Bloods were outnumbered 4-1. You couldn't pay somebody to be a Blood in LA back then. That's why all these people that, like, it's all trending to be a Blood now. It's funny, and Bloods fighting each other is funny, because back then they were united, and Crips outnumbered them 4-1. So here it is. The LA riots happen. I'm in Miami. I'm not gangbanging anymore because there's no gangs out there, other than they had a few gangs like Nika Power, Nika Force, and Latin Kings, but it's not nearly like it is in LA. So I'm kind of doing my own thing out there, and I start getting into some trouble with my ex, and we're like, I could have faced 10 years in prison for strong arm robbery. They dropped the charges. I spent 3 days in Dade County Jail. And then when I lived with her in New York, we moved to New York, I spent 3 times a overnight stay in jail. So I'm getting in trouble with her, right? But at the meantime, it saved me, because 1992 happened to be like the worst year, the peak year of gang violence and violence in LA, County, as far as murders, homicides. And but the long-term effects were that the Crip and Blood thing was starting to somewhat simmer down because of the peace treaty. Even though it was only in a few places, it changed a lot of the animosity and the hatred Bloods and Crips had for each other. It kind of leveled off, and then you started to see a decline after that, steadily. It wasn't the same anymore. And I could attest to that, because when I came back to visit in the summer of '92 for a few weeks and went back to Miami Beach, I remember the tension in the air. You could cut it with a knife. Like after the riots, a couple months after the riots, the tension was thick, I'm telling you. But I noticed the Crip and Blood thing, that a lot of the blacks that were Crips and Bloods, some of them were starting to like chill out, and they were wearing the Malcolm X hats, and they're more about black unity. But there still was not, like I said, that was only in some parts, because a lot of the Crips and Bloods were still fighting each other. But I noticed the tension between Crips and Bloods wasn't nearly what it once was before the riots. But overall in LA, the tension was thick after the riots. I mean, you can cut it with a knife. LA today is nothing like it used to be. And in some ways it's good, some ways it's not. And so I lived in Miami Beach for like 6 months, then moved to New York for a year, and eventually got divorced from my ex and came back over here. Well, the thing was, when I came back, LA had changed a lot. And during the time that I lived in Miami Beach, I got a call. I had a best friend that was a Sureño. He was from LA barrio, and some gang I'm not going to name, but he got killed. He got shot to death. There could have been a chance I would have been with him. He was my best friend, even though it was from a different gang. He got shot and killed in Highland Park. And I remember I got that call, so who knows what would have happened, right? I think that's just the grace of God on my life, is that so many things could have gone wrong in my life during that era, and they didn't. So when I came back, I was like 19 years old. Like I said, a year and a half living in Miami, New York. By the time I come back I think it was probably the end of the summer of '93. I don't know what it was, but things had changed in LA. It was a whole different world. In that short time that I had been gone, things had changed a lot. The LA riots were a big part of that. Even the gang thing was starting to change. where now this tag banging thing started to become popular in LA, the tag banging crews. And so where it was once real trendy and cool to be a gang member, that was starting to be the same thing but for tag bangers. And I think in 93 is when you started to see the gang banging slightly decline in LA. It had reached its peak in 92. And so when I came back, I had kept in contact with some of my friends that were in the gang I was in. And I remember when I came back, the gang wasn't the same. It was still here, but it wasn't as deep. And like I said, we weren't deep in the first place, like 40 members. I remember the two girls that were like secretary type figures in the clique. The main guy, one of the main guys who formed it, he had moved out of state. And the two girls kind of, because they were like, I was close with them, but he was the one that was really close with them. And like, I think once he moved, they kind of like lost interest. And then I remember one other guy went to his house, his parents, his dad, he didn't live with both his parents, but he lived with his dad. His dad didn't want him hanging out with me. Things had just changed. And like I said, kind of the Crip and Blood thing had changed anyways. The intensity wasn't there like it was before the riots. And even still right after the riots, still in 92, there was still an after effect. So things had changed. So I'm doing my thing, and I decided to go to the Army, but I'm still repping my clique, right? I'm still repping it, right? And I even remember I repped it in the Army. And I got out, I just was a reservist, right? Because I didn't have my high school diploma. I had some equivalent of a GED, so I couldn't even go to the full-time Army. And I came back out of that, and I remember I just started partying a lot. I hang out with the party crews became popular in LA, and I joined a party crew. Because my gang, by this time, when I get out of AIT, it's 1994, and the gang had really depleted. I mean, they're not around anymore. They died out. Like by the end of the 90s, they were done. Because like I said, the intensity of the Crip and Blood war really started to decline after the LA riots. Still hot in 92, but 93 was really starting to, it wasn't what it once was. And I know it's still you have the death row thing and all that. It was still strong in a lot of areas, but it wasn't. What I'm saying is, you notice the difference. Like, people weren't getting killed as much for wearing the wrong color and all that stuff. Now, the Sureños, their wars with each other were getting hotter and hotter, and then the wars between the Sureños and Blacks, and the Bloods and the Crips were super hot in the 90s. But that's basically how it was, and I think it was when I found out I was going to have my first child in 95, that's when I decided, I was done with that lifestyle. I decided in 95 when I found out I was going to have my first child, it just clicked on me. I'm a compartmentalist. I was done with that lifestyle. My gang was pretty much, dying out. The clique that we had, it was dying out anyways, and the people that I was cool with, they either got locked up. One guy moved out of state. One guy, it's just he got set straight by his dad. And the girls were they were no longer, they faded away from it because the guy that they were close with moved out of state. And then the rest were just youngsters. And so, and again, I think by the time that I decided I'm done with it, there was 20 people left in the clique. And it wasn't really active, so that was that. And that's pretty much my story. Like I said, I've seen LA change a lot. It's a whole different world. Now the gang thing is coming back now. That's the thing. The violence, it is all over the country, is going back up since 2020. So it is back active again. But anyways, that's not, I'm older now, so it's not my time, man. It's their time, and hopefully people will be smart enough not to ever join a gang in the first place, because there's no upside to ever joining a gang. Don't let people fool you. glorify that stuff. No upside. All right, bye.